You're listening to Product-Led Revenue, brought to you by Correlated. In each episode, you'll hear first-hand advice and tactics from SaaS, sales, and revenue leaders about using product signals to drive expansion and revenue growth. Let's jump in.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Product-Led Revenue. I'm Breezy Beaumont, and this episode is brought to you by Correlated, a customer expansion platform for B2B tech companies that focus on product-led growth. Today, our guest is Brian Malkerson, CRO at Attentive. Brian, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Love the glasses as well for anybody who's seeing this on camera. We are pretty much matching on either side today. Okay, so to give our audience some background on yourself, can you tell us about your role at Attentive?
I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Attentive. So I oversee everything kind of on the go-to-market side, from our sales and sales operations, sales development team, partnerships, and enablement.
Awesome. All right, so Brian, let's get started. We're just going to jump right into it here. There's a big problem with getting product data into the hands of sales teams. So how are you solving that today at Attentive?
It's a great question. Right now we do it in a number of different ways. Most of it is through like different Looker dashboards. So we'll pipe in different data. And we look at it from a few different lenses. One, kind of the pre-launch and launch process. Then we also look at it when somebody's in trial, and then post coming out of trial, and kind of once they're part of a longer term engagement. And so we're trying to look for different elements of that product adoption in those different life cycles. And then, the way our sales motion works is that when somebody signs up for a trial, we bring in our colleagues from the customer success side and our implementation team, and then work pretty hand in hand. So, they're also using those dashboards quite a bit to optimize that launch process.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. And can you give a few examples of some of the more specific things that you're tracking in Looker, or some of the insights that have stuck out to the team?
Yeah. So for us, first we look at one is just kind of some core metrics like time to launch. We want to understand how quickly we're able to launch and get that client stood up. We also look at things like what are the core KPIs of that client, and seeing if we are coming in at or above goal for what those KPIs are, and if we're not, what's driving that. We also understand that there's certain elements of the product that we think are really important to driving success. So we're an SMS marketing platform and tend to be very ROI driven. We sell into marketers, and I'd say a couple of the key elements they look for in a successful SMS marketing program is one, can we grow the list really quickly to make it a meaningful or impactful program? And then two, are we driving a lot of revenue for the business? On average, it's about 18 to 20% of their digital revenue will be driven by the platform. So very similar to other channels like email. And then lastly, are they seeing good ROI in that platform? So as part of that, we try and understand, are there certain elements that they're setting up and both adopting those parts of our platform, and are they working well? So on the list growth side, we have about 15 to 20 different tools that we can use to help drive signups or opt-ins to help their consumers opt in for their SMS marketing channel. So we'll look and see, hey, have they adopted the core ones? What are the sign-up rates, and then what does that look like from a benchmark perspective? And if there are other ones that they're not signing, that they haven't signed up for, why is that? So that way, either the salesperson or the client, the customer success person can bring that up either via email or during one of the weekly or bi-weekly calls to help them optimize their program. Another good example is setting up different types of messaging flows. So we have things like triggered messages, like abandoned cart or abandoned browse messages. If a customer comes in and adds something to cart and doesn't buy, and sets those kind of like set it and forget it, or welcome series message flows. And then separately, we have more like campaign type messages. So they can go in and see how many messages have they sent out and how has that changed over time, but also what types of messaging and how much segmentation are they doing for their future messages, and then use that to compare against kind of best practices.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And one of the things that we talked about in a previous call was that you guys are looking at hiring a product sales team. Is this something that the product sales team would own, or what's that function going to look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I just described is kind of how we use it in our existing sales process for kind of our core product. As we continue to develop and roll out additional products, we're going to have more and more focus on not just selling into net new customers, but driving adoption within our existing customer base. So I think in that case, it'll be looking at a variety of different factors, both some of the demographics of those customers, as well as maybe other elements of the tech stack that they're using, as well as how they're using our core product to better understand which customers we should be reaching out to for different products and how we want to position those sales. So that's definitely going to be a big focus for us in the back half of this year and in 2022.
Got it. Yeah, makes a ton of sense. So one question that we get a lot from the folks that we're talking to is, what's the best way to balance the sales motion with free trials or a self-service motion? So how are you balancing those two different functions? And on that note, I know you guys had recently acquired Privy, which also has a freemium model. So how are you balancing those two acts?
Yeah, I think for us, we tend to give a trial or a free trial. That was something that we built into our process 4 or 5 years ago. And just quickly go back in time, like when we first rolled out SMS, it was a platform that no one was looking for, right? Like a solution without a buyer at that point. SMS had been around for a couple of decades, but extremely low adoption, and I think people had a negative connotation with kind of traditional SMS marketing programs. And so when we rolled that out in an environment of chatbots and a lot of other things that brands were more focused on, what we wanted to do is say, hey, look, we know how well this channel can work, but we just have to make it as easy as we can to get into marketers' hands and get them to try it. And so what we did was did more of and I think a lot of times you see trials and more of a pure kind of self-serve type, more traditional SaaS model. For us, like we don't have a pure self-serve model, so we instituted it, kind of with more of a standard customer success support team. And what it allowed us to do was, one, get a lot of people to evangelize that sale a little bit easier and get people to try it. But it also really aligned the goals of the customer with that of our platform, right? Because we got a lot of immediate feedback if somebody didn't launch or if they didn't convert from the trial. We knew that immediately. You didn't have this long-term contract that somebody was locked into before they knew how the product worked. We immediately found that out and were able to make lots of quick adjustments in our process as well as our product, which I think has continued to help us to date. So, we viewed the trial, and I think it gives us a lot of, outside of just as a good incentive from a sales perspective, also gives us a lot of other benefits from a company and platform perspective. I think when we think about how do we add more self-service elements, is something we're constantly thinking about. One, just we built a lot to make sure that clients, some of them are more I should say power users, and they want to go in and do a bunch of stuff themselves. We have a really great partner community that goes in and will do a lot as far as helping power campaigns. And so we want to continue to keep making it easier for us to launch customers, as well as for both people at Attentive, but also our partners and brands to be able to use the platform. To your point around Privy, whom we recently acquired, they have basically almost a pure self-serve platform. So they kind of work with they have hundreds of thousands of customers, and a lot of, I'd say, emerging and kind of smaller direct-to-consumer Shopify and brands and people on other e-commerce platforms. And so they have a slightly different model, right, where they can come in and you can just get everything going right away and do it all yourself. And I think that's worked extremely well for them. I think one issue for us is that because SMS is a new channel, there's just a lot of guidance and a lot of compliance and other issues to really make sure you do it well. And so, we've kind of, part of our secret sauce has been like our really great client strategy team that really helps make sure that people turn this into a big channel in a short period of time.
Yeah, and I think you've been touching on this a few times, but I mean, you guys created a category at Attentive. So what was that like in the early days? What's that been like to scale up a totally new category?
It's been a lot of fun, but yeah, it's definitely been challenging. And had a ton of support, from across the company. We had a great, product team that kept adapting very early to different kind of changes in market. Our marketing team has built like tons of amazing content to help break out. And then, as I mentioned, if you don't have a great client strategy team, keeping people really happy, you're building that flywheel is just so important. So early on, 90% or 95% of the time if we didn't win a deal, they would just choose not to do SMS, right? And almost 95 to 100% of customers were doing SMS for the very first time. So it was all about really evangelizing this as a channel and a platform, and not even as much on Attentive. It was really focused on, hey, how do we tell a story about traffic moving to mobile and conversion rates being on mobile and open rates, engagement rates, and email, continuing to go down, and also just shifting demographics. Younger generations really spending all their time in text, and really not focusing on things like email and getting that story out. And then I think as the market started getting more excited about this channel, really kind of adopting our pitch to also understand like, hey, why Attentive? So as our kind of win rates went up over time, we were also now 30 to 40% of our customers are transitioning off another platform and coming on to Attentive. And so the biggest challenge I think has been, still making sure we tell that story about evangelizing why and doing the channel, but then also making a very clear distinction as to why brands should be working with Attentive. And so it can be a little bit challenging when you're moving in a very fast-paced environment and hiring and training the reps who can kind of shift between those two different talk tracks in those different environments, and also kind of keeping that pitch very, kind of very clear. And then also in the landscape overall is a lot of other, other parts of the landscape have either started partnering with us from an SMS perspective or coming out with their own solutions. And so trying to navigate that have been really exciting challenges. But yeah, I mean, it's been pretty, to see what it was like 4 years ago and kind of what it's like today and what we expect over the next 2 or 3 years has definitely changed significantly.
Yeah, what was that moment like when it sort of turned the corner from, which SMS instead of why SMS?
Or why SMS, I guess, to which SMS.
Going from that educational piece to then, people deciding which platform to go with, to then that moment there's kind of two major milestones there. I mean, what's that like for you on the sales side to be part of that?
Yeah, I think, looking back, I'm trying to remember that there's some big conferences like Shop Talk and Etel West. A couple of years ago, you started, I think, seeing more and more, you started seeing other kind of companies pop up doing it. You started talking to brands who had maybe said, oh, I actually chatted to somebody else about this. You started, which we just didn't come across very much, which I think definitely helps, because the more people you kind of get out there talking about the channel and really pushing it, I think definitely help drive up, brands up that adoption curve, right? If you think about it, I'm guessing there's probably 40 or 50% of e-commerce retail brands that are doing SMS marketing today. There's no reason why it shouldn't be 90%, 100% the next couple of years. So we've already seen a really strong adoption, because it was probably maybe 5% 3 or 4 years ago. But there's still quite a ways to go. That was, I think, extremely helpful. And then you also started to see it, I think, on the agency side, where I think early on, often you have to go directly to the brands and really carve out why this new channel or tool is something that's going to be very valuable. usually the agencies, they're trying to solve a problem for the brands, right? Like something like email, which has been around for a long time and is kind of a known quantity. So most of the agencies had just been focused on more kind of traditional channels, with some exceptions of ones that were, I think, were pretty early. But then all of a sudden, most, if not all, the agencies started being like, oh, we need to have an SMS solution or SMS partner. And that, I think, was another kind of indicator that you started seeing those corners turn. And lastly, probably even some of the big conferences asking if we'd speak, or asking our brand partners to speak about SMS, like the CRMC conference. I remember a few years back in Chicago. And, again, it's a very email focused conference. And, they wanted us to get on stage with Jack in the Box, who's a customer of ours, to talk through SMS, which I remember at the time being like, wow, it's, you can start seeing it, the focus change.
Yeah, I definitely feel that, especially, being on the marketing and growth side of things. It's pretty exciting when people start to ask you to be there instead of, trying to knock your way in. So I think, as you build this team and as you guys have built this market, one of the things that you need to do is be always aligning your team for success. So I'm curious, how did you create a winning culture at Attentive?
Yeah, I mean, culture is obviously something that's, hugely important. And it's been a very, I think, I'd say when I chat with like Carl from Sequoia, who's Sequoia's one of the investors, and Carl's been, really helpful, just like support from, an advisor. And when I asked him a while back how he built a really good culture at his previous company, and he said winning. He's like, winning creates culture. And I do think there's an element of that where success definitely helps. But I think when you start out, when you're a 5 or 10 person startup, right, and then you have early employees and that kind of culture, and it's like us against the world mentality. And then as you scale and you bring in different people along different parts of that journey, and then you throw in, a pandemic where for us, 90% of people were in our New York office, and then we went to a remote first culture and hired, 60% plus of my department and our company in the pandemic. People hadn't even met in person before. Those, I think, obviously, there's just like a ton of different challenges there. And we try and mix in like, hey, like sharing people kind of the early days and kind of how we've evolved and what's led to that and our core values, but also mixing in, what we want to be and where we want to get to, and making sure the new people that come on board feel excited about that. And so, yeah, I mean, we've been doing a ton of virtual events. We started doing more kind of in person, right, around like quarterly events to get people together, and sales kickoffs on an annual basis, that kind of stuff. And really just trying to incent the way we do incentives and goals, and really trying to make sure that, hey, yes, while sales can often be more of an individual sport at some level, we want to make sure people feel aligned from a team perspective, because we think that's really important to our culture and our future success.
Makes a ton of sense. I think one of the struggles that we've seen with sometimes with companies, especially who are moving towards product led, or who are starting as a product led company, is that balance between marketing, customer success, and sales teams. So, finding the balance, especially between customer success and sales, and when you're using product data to inform how you interact with folks. What's that balance been like at Attentive, balancing those two teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime, I mean, we went from, 10 employees to almost 1,000 employees in, roughly a 4-year time frame. And so
that's crazy.
Trying to balance all those things. I'll be the first to admit, it's definitely challenging at times. I think, one, it's been really helpful to have just, we have a fantastic head of marketing in Brooke and Eric on our client strategy team. And we had worked together at previous companies. So I think it definitely helped to have those kind of good experience and strong relationships from Twitter and our previous startup. So that definitely helps, as well as just like broadly across the exec team. I think also just, making sure that, you set up the right processes and feedback loops in place. And this is something we still work on. So we started doing biweekly working sessions between that sales and customer success handoff, right? Because you can imagine, as part of that, there may be certain things that maybe some issue didn't come up or wasn't uncovered during the sales or diligence process, and then all of a sudden comes up during launch. And how do we best get that feedback and work those issues out? And what's the right way to to up level issues when those things come about? And then also when forecasting and how do we need the right support from both marketing and CS front. We're trying to do a better job of just not just forecasting that further out, but sharing that interdepartmentally, so we can kind of staff and talk about what are going to be the challenges or opportunities as we continue to do that. And so I'll even meet quarterly with on the marketing side to align on events, to align on ABM support, to align on other new initiatives, or if when we rolled out new verticals, what type of support we need there, and how to balance that with other existing priorities.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you just touched on, which is something every company struggles with at some point, is that setting expectations between sales and customer success on the customer side. How do you see things like a freemium or a free trial helping to set those expectations for the customer?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think especially when it's a newer channel, especially early on, we'd kind of ask customers what they wanted the KPI to be, and they'd kind of be like, "You tell us," almost. And so we started, I think, just being more proactive in sharing benchmarks. We're like, well, here's typically what customers are looking at. One, it's things like list growth and how you can scale the channel, and then also just trying to understand what typical ROI or other goals they have for similar, or say analogous kind of like marketing channels. And I think we built into our sales force and at the opportunity level where sales reps need to fill in certain key questions and information before doing the handoff to client strategy, right? And that was something that was kind of iterated on. And so, how can we get as much in the right information? So when we do that kind of pre-launch call, so after somebody signs up, sales and client strategy will get on a pre-launch call with the brand. And how do we make sure we have all the right information we need, and so we can move it as fast as possible and get the client launched in a very timely manner? And so, that's been kind of an iterative process over time. And I think as more and more brands are doing SMS or move over to our platform with already having an existing program, that also changes, right? So early on, when people aren't really sure what KPIs to set or what to do, it's much more about, okay, like we have a crawl, walk, run kind of recommendation, and just kind of trust us to guide you through that, and we'll make sure we hit kind of what your revenue or ROI goals are. Now it's much, again, more of a hybrid where you have certain customers who have very explicit things that they need from a product perspective, or a customer perspective, because they have experience with the channel. So I think sometimes that transition can go down a slightly separate path, and we're continuing to build that out and how we handle those situations versus people that are doing SMS for the first time.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you were talking to someone who's just starting to build this out and work with their customers at an early stage, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give them? Would you give to the sales team at a startup?
As far as working with CS, or just like breaking through and getting those initial sales?
As far as working with CS, but I'm actually curious on your second answer there too. So let's start with the first one though, with aligning with CS.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, and this is something I've thought about more recently as we've gone remote and just obviously just brought on a lot of new people, is I think empathy is one thing that in this kind of Zoom remote world, and sometimes you see it on channels like social media, we try and do as much as we can, either a more pod approach. So AEs are working with some more CS folks, and to try and, like we did this pre-pandemic where we set up either happy hours or other events to kind of cross-pollinate stuff across the different teams. So I think empathy is a big part of it. And I think the second thing is just that mentality, like what I do on my weekly sales meeting. Since we have the CS to AE scores, we have people kind of score the handoff for all the opportunities. We'll go and we'll find some of the top ones and highlight where the clients, the customer success person highlighted like certain A's and what they did and gave them a 10 out of 10. And we'll highlight a bunch of those weekly. Again, just to try and reinforce the mindset that, hey, yes, we're on the sales side. We're trying to get people to sign up, but like we're ultimately responsible to make sure that, that the expectations that we set during the sales process are, is something that we can actually meet, and that it's a happy customer and a customer success manager, right? Like it's not just that initial conversation is important. So you try and do things like that to, and I'd say didn't do that early on and probably didn't focus on as much. And it's definitely an area that we try and focus on more now because it's obviously super important that, we're setting up our colleagues on the customer success side for success. I think as far as breaking through sales early on, yeah, I mean, it's obviously tough. I mean, I think I was at a customer event the other week and was chatting with like an early customer, and it's like I remember when the mindset I went when I joined Attentive was just this idea that Brian, our CEO, had worked with and said, hey, SMS marketing, we just they just rolled it out and had like a test customer, and I was like, SMS marketing doesn't sound like like something people are going to want. I was thinking about it from a consumer perspective. And so, and then I saw the data and I'm like, wow, okay, we just got to get this out here because I saw how well the channel works. But I think not even appreciating that, like every marketer, nobody's hitting up marketers with like, hey, this is a bad product, come try it out. And so even if you're saying free trial or you're saying it's 20x ROI or whatever that story is, or your revenue projections, we started adding a lot of that to try and get more specific and to try and get people to kind of buy in like more, because they're inundated every day, right, with 20, 30, 40 messages from other platforms claiming to give similar results, whatever the channel or category is. And so a lot of it, again, is just finding those early adopters and then making sure that you give them an amazing experience, right? And again, not just the sales side, it's a product, it's a client strategy side, because they're going to be the ones that are your references. They're going to be the ones that are talking about you at conferences or to their colleagues or leaving to go to other companies and bring you along. And so just like any B2C, B2B, it's all the same, right? It's just making sure, especially those early customers and in general customers, like just make sure they have a great experience and really like you. And then if you're delivering that and you're continuing to get out there and hustle and find new brands to bring on board, and they're the right kind of ICP, then, I think you'll be successful, at least in the early stages.
Awesome. And last question for you here. I'm curious if you had one thing that you were going to be focusing on as a team going forward to be more product-led in your sales approach. Is there something that your team is focusing on going forward?
Yeah, I mean, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning of the conversation, for us, I mean, we have 4,000 active customers that have we find that like very high NPS scores, very strong affinity to the brand, and we acquire companies like Privy, and there's other tools then that those customers can and probably should be using. And so I think for us, a big focus is, how do we best identify those customers that could potentially be using other products or services that we're doing. And so that is going to be a big focus and something we're exploring, and admittedly are still early on and excited for that journey. But and just in general, as we continue to scale, just we're being very much more, I think, deliberate in everything from our hiring. We built out like a hiring model so we can forecast what we need throughout the entire top of funnel to hire the right SDRs and AEs over certain periods of time. That then flows into our operating capacity model, which is now built out for the next few years, right? So we're constantly trying to operationalize more of what we're doing. And I view getting smarter about, how do we use product-led growth to continue to expand our relationships with customers, and how can we continue to evolve that. It will definitely be a big focus in the back half of this year.
Well, certainly wishing you all the success and excited to watch it from the sidelines. Brian, thanks again. Really appreciate you spending some time with us. Yeah.
How should we be thinking about product-led growth?
In so many ways. No, I think if we look at many companies that are launching today, and existing SaaS companies are all sort of moving towards this model of giving away their product for free. And that's in some different capacities, right? A lot of companies are launching with free trials or free versions that are a limited version of their product. And I think there's a lot of weight to be shown for the success of this. If we look at companies like Zoom and Calendly and Snowflake, and, a lot of the biggest IPOs in 2019 and 2020 so far have all been product-led growth companies. So I think we have a lot to learn from them, and we're excited over at Correlated to help these companies unlock more potential from looking at how people are using their product, and unlock revenue opportunities from that. So that's my look at it. I'm excited about the product-led movement. And it's a wave that we will continue to ride.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to it as well. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Brian. Have a good one.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Product-Led Revenue. This show is brought to you by Correlated, the first platform built for product-led revenue. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow the Product-Led Revenue podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit getcorrelated.com/podcast to get access to all of the latest episodes.